Hey, Tim, how are you today?
I'm doing really fine, thank you. Boy, it is a weather and a half outside. I was not wanting to go outside, but I decided just to grin and bear it and move outside and get some chores done before the weather came in. And boy, am I glad I did that.
Well, one thing about being in the arid New Mexico is we love to have our rains. And so I think anything that happens to come our way this way is probably something we're looking forward to anyway, right?
You're right. You're right.
So, you know, I- you just spurred something. Our topic today is just do it. The whole idea about as project managers, we're often instructed to just do it. And your little vignette kind of reminded me that, you saw the weather coming in and you went out and you just did it. You did what you had to do. So it was,
Right.
I was reminded that in terms of this whole idea of just do it as project managers, I think, you and I have had this conversation many times over these podcasts that I grew up in um, fixed price, fixed schedule, fixed timelines to get things done. And you kind of took your risk in terms of whether or not you're going to make a profit. And a lot of that spurred this whole just do it mentality. And I was thinking that throughout my career, I know there was a lot of pressure from my management to just do it, i.e., just get it done, because we can't go over budget, we can't go over schedule, because that means going over budget. But there's also, I just remember a lot of times that early in my career, as a um, confessed, self-confessed practicing perfectionist, sometimes the just do it didn't sit well with me because it wasn't quite right. I had to get it right. And so in those cases, the just do it didn't make any difference. But here's the one that really stuck in my craw, and I've had to learn to live with it. Maybe we can use this as a jumping off point. A lot of times my management came to me, and I'm confessing this, I'm not saying which corporations, but they would come to me and they say, you know what, get it in, get that deliverable completed, get it in. If you're missing a few things, my client won't know the difference anyway. That just stuck in my craw. And what I'm saying to our audience today is, as project managers, let's take a look at this just do it mentality in terms of what it really means to make it happen, make those projects happen. But let's not also sacrifice our self-respect, our self-esteem, our ability to get things done in a very respectful manner. How's that? How's that for a kickoff?
That's great. Let's unpack this really quickly. In that
Sure.
short kickoff, you talked about just do it, which means scope.
Yeah.
But you also talked about it doing the right way, which is quality. And then you're talking about, you know, getting it done with everything else. It sounds like an integration problem almost instead of a scope or quality or schedule problem.
Well, I think it's probably all of those, depending on how you tackle the problem. Quite often in fixed price projects, and I don't know what your particular experience is in fixed price, but if you're bidding 100 or 200 million dollars, there's a lot on the table. A month late could be in the 5, 7, 10 million dollars, and that goes straight to the bottom line. So nobody wants to be late with those kind of numbers facing them in their face. So I think it's all of those problems, and then we have to kind of thread that needle and make sure that we deal with them appropriately.
So let's compare my experience, okay?
Sure.
So I was bleeding edge technology, like stuff that's not out in the public yet,
Yeah.
for 7.5 years. And I was helping corporations figure out how to integrate these new and emerging technologies in certain ways to actually gain competitive edge. At the same time, after that part of the company folded, I was brought into new product development, which was, again, bleeding edge technology and working on brand recognition and brand management and marketing. And a lot of that work. So a lot of my stuff was Agile throughout 2000 to 2012. So I did a big combination of predictive project management and Agile project management based on what the needs of the client were. Now, I felt your pain and I lived your pain, where they said we cannot go beyond schedule, especially when you get into government contracts. Just cannot push the button and say we're going to push that out. Even in my later work here, after I left that corporation, when I was a part owner in upgrading cell towers, the government gives you a window and they say we're going to have that cell tower down for those 4 hours and you better have it up or we're going to punish you. And I had to carry like $1 million of liability and then $2 million in errors and emissions insurance just to be able to compete for the opportunity to have work. So just get that done was a mindset that was externally implemented. Now let's look at Agile. It even gets worse, because there's a human behavior in business that says 100% is good, 150% is better. It's profitability, right? So if we have a little extra time, let's push it. If we have a little extra money, let's push it. And that's what business job is. But you spoke very eloquently to the beginning of this, and you said that doing it correctly is more important. So a project manager is created and refined and polished to say 100% planned and delivered meant I did a good job. Now, we have a dilemma here. And how we're not going to resolve this dilemma. We're going to actually live and balance that dilemma as long as we are there. And that's what the project manager is there for, not to solve these things, but to balance them.
Well, and that's exactly right. And that's what I want people who are listening to us today, who then go from this podcast back to their work environment and try to implement some of the things that we suggest. We want to make sure that they understand that every situation is different and it is a dilemma. And I was kind of smiling when you talked about the fact that a project manager is trained that 100% is good, 150% is better. When you're dealing with fixed price, you never want to go above that 100%, or very seldom, because then the client expects it over and over and over again.
That's right. 100% planned and delivered is what a project manager, that's the value of predictive projects. That's why we have this structure that's so firm and says thou shalt not, because we're there as the pushback and say, let's let's take a breath here. Let's be reasonable. And you understand that the decision you're making is going to push the schedule out. It's going to push the budget out. It's going to add risk, and it's going to take quality away from you. Now, what do you want to do? And it takes a lot of backbone and a lot of practice to get used to being that, let's push against just get it done.
Well, I talked about when I led off, and then some of our conversation up until now has been dealing with the kind of the profit motive, or maybe it's dealing with the let's not lose any money motive, especially dealing with fixed price kind of projects. But are there other motivations? Are there other sources of this mindset of just get it done? Do you think?
Yes. Are there other sources of risk?
Yeah.
There's a galaxy. There's a galaxy. So let's try to quantify this and wrap our hands around at least a piece. So one of the sources of just get it done is an entry level or a middle level manager showing their value. I'm not denigrating them, okay?
Yep.
But they have an opportunity to say, if I can create a sense of urgency, I can show that I have added value. Now, once you start talking about I as a manager, you're no longer a leader.
Right.
I means that I'm going to walk away and I am successful. And that's the antithesis of leadership. That adds damage. And that's an artificial sense of urgency. The way you create a sense of urgency is by something called time boxing. And time boxing does that. It says, we don't know what the estimate is, and we're going to try to hit it sort of like within the same county, if not the same town. And we're going to put around it. But the next time we do this, we'll have a benchmark and we'll have some data that relies on us to be more accurate. If you are creating an artificial sense of urgency, that is you telling your team and stakeholders that I'm not able to estimate.
Well, not only that, but once they catch on that this is your modus operandi, they won't trust you for future urgencies. It's like the boy who cried wolf, that old Aesop's fable, right? It's in terms of you can only do this once or twice. But let me offer something else along this kind of career aspiration. I think in some firms, and certainly I felt this in one or two of the firms that I worked in, and there was pressure applied to project managers to show their stuff. And it wasn't that they created a sense of urgency, it's that the sense of urgency was in many ways foisted upon them such that they had to deliver or it's up or out kind of thing. So I think that also plays into just do it. And unfortunately, and I hate to say this, but I have witnessed good project managers taking a shortcut here, a shortcut there, and you don't always get the top quality product that you're capable of doing in terms of meeting the timelines.
Yeah, if you have, and this is just natural human behavior. This is not good or bad humans. This is just what humans do. If you constantly put a human under this expectation, it's up or out, up or out, up or out. Humans will realize that this is just the way work is. And number one, they're going to take shortcuts. Or number two, they're going to become, whether they know it or not, they're going to become passive aggressive. And when you go beyond, that cultural boundary and start becoming passive aggressive, that's where you damage work, you damage your relationships, and you damage your own perception of yourself. And it's hard to come back from that.
It is hard to come back from that. The other thing is, when I relayed that kind of experience that I had, some of those weren't always bad. Some of the up or out also forced some project managers like myself, who were perfectionists, to say, wait a minute, sometimes very good is good enough. Perfection does not necessarily add to the quality. It adds to your feeling. It doesn't necessarily add to the quality, and sometimes may detract from it. Because if I insert my sense of perfectionism upon a product that doesn't necessarily benefit my client by the amount of time that I put my team through to get it done, then I have caused a problem for the project, not help the project because of my sense of wanting to do things perfectly.
Have you ever? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was saying, I'm reminded of, I'm looking at my Apple iPhone, and I suspect every other iPhone is, or every other type of mobile device is the same. There are tons of apps on my phone, but did you ever notice how often they get updated? Had someone waited until they were perfect for the first release, we wouldn't have had them ever.
Right.
But they get perfected through those updates. So we have to understand that as project managers, that there are times that just do it is important.
No, and again, it's not just do it that's wrong. It's the mindset and the way that just do it is communicated and implemented.
Yes.
I really believe that. Now, you were talking about quality. And this is really important when we're doing work correctly. This is something that I have had in my training for the last 7 years that really opens up interesting discussions with my students. How much quality do you need to put into your work? What is the definition of just enough quality?
Well, I think if you're doing your job correctly as a project manager, as a project team, you have defined that in the requirement specification as you move along. And so therefore you see the quality because you've written it into the specifications, whatever those look like. But I'm reminded, I have a good friend who is a Green Beret, and I'm going to misquote him, but I'm going to try to get the essence of this. And what he would say as a Green Beret, and this applies to us as project managers, he would say, an imperfect plan violently executed is much better than a perfect plan that hasn't gotten started yet. And I think it's the same thing with deliverables, that a imperfect deliverable with sufficient and good quality delivered to the client is much better for that client than waiting for perfection based on some other arbitrary standard, and the client gets it late, and then it's less use for that client to use. How's that?
Let me compare that. You're spot on. You're spot on. Because if you look at textbook definitions of quality, there's something called optimal quality, which is just enough. And that's defined as the benefits of adding that quality work to your work is equal to the cost. And what optimal quality says is, if doing quality work gets in the way of a successful project, you're doing it wrong. If quality work is more important than creating a deliverable, like you said, meeting specifications, then you're doing the work wrong. These are the ISO 10,000 and Six Sigma projects that go sideways because QA is using them as a banner project inside the corporation.
That's exactly right. I was just going to look up, I don't have a time now. I was going to look up to see what my latest iOS software release was.
You know
I'm
what?
Sure there have been hundreds, and
you know what? Yeah. And this is so critical for us to understand. I was confounded back in 2007 when one of my peer project managers said, no, we're going to crawl first, and then we're going to walk, and then we're going to run. And this was a new product development. And then another project manager said, yeah, we're going to get a bare bones laptop out the door, and then we're going to do the laptop with better architecture and a better hard drive, and then we're going to do it that way. And I didn't understand until I started understanding that they were designing a deliverable that was going to meet needs and expectations of people that they didn't even know were out there yet. And how do I start work in such a way that people don't even understand what they need?
Well, I was just amused because something came across my desk yesterday, and I was amused because there's a plaque. You and I are in Albuquerque. There's a plaque downtown that commemorates Microsoft starting in Albuquerque. And it commemorates Steve Allen and Bill Gates, and I think it had something to do with DOS. Now, how many people who are listening to us right now, especially budding project managers, have even heard of DOS, let alone program those cryptic lines of, DOS commands on their laptops or on their PCs, right? So let me ask you this, Tim. We've now talked about profit motives. We've talked about perfectionism versus quality versus career motives to get it done, get it out the door. Do you think there's any other ways, like some politics rules or politics or cultural issues or those sorts of things that also kind of push on the get it done motive?
Oh, yes. Politics. A vice president is making a public speech, and we need that product polished and ready for that vice president. Number one, they have authority and they can command and they have rank, and that's my politics. And number three, you don't misread and you do not ignore the advice of a vice president inside the company, and that's culture. Both of those actually say, we need to do this, and we need to do it yesterday. And yesterday means do it with perfection yesterday. And so a lot of people, when they enter the workforce, this is the scariest thing for them to face. And they have to go through it 3 or 4 times before they figure out that politics and culture are there to define and control the group. But at the same time, there are ways to insert a little bit of reality and set a little bit of expectations. And we're lucky as project managers because we have a little tiny bubble. And if we can actually have enough experience and practice in showing how the decisions of others impact the success of that bubble, we have a chance at a little bit of a power and authority ourselves.
You reminded me when I was when I was early in my career, I remember one of the first large scale IT projects that I had the privilege of being on, and I was put in as the lead for the implementation process, which included the front end user acceptance testing. And I remember being really upset with my boss because I knew development had not delivered 3 or 4 of the critical screens we needed. But my boss insisted that we start UAT. We have to get this started if we're going to get it done on time. And my push was, but there's 3 or 4 screens that are missing. I can't do full UAT. And he looked at me and said, I'm not asking you to do full UAT. I'm asking you to start UAT with what you have. And it hit me then that culturally, I was back in the classroom, that an assignment wasn't complete and ready for handing in until it was completely complete. We didn't hand in 9 out of 10 questions on our assignments in class. Right. And so that really threw me when I was a young, budding team lead on a full large scale computer project.
And that brings in another thing that I've always relied on. And I sometimes am accused of writing this on my hand. Project manager looks at their hand and they say, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm misinterpreting this? What if I'm communicating the wrong message? What if I'm doing the wrong message for this situation? What if I'm applying influence in the wrong area? And this is where we have a discussion where we go down the path of ego and hubris, which is, again, a great topic within leadership.
You know, there's not what you just talked about, though, there's not a lot of difference between that what if kinds of questions and just the whole art of decision making. And sometimes we can sit there and fluctuate as to whether am I making the right decision or whether I'm wrong, as you suggested, or whether I'm influencing incorrectly. Sometimes we just have to step out and then be ready to back off or change direction if it's not working. Because we can't be 100% prescient in terms of what's happening in the future. So we have to sometimes faithfully step out, try something, and be willing to back off and be willing to say, oops, I blew it. Let's go over here, team.
It's a balance. It really is. It's another one of those dilemmas because you have to step out and see the thing as a whole. And you also have to remember that you're a stakeholder and you have terrific influence over the direction and the success of the project. And you cannot ignore that either. So we have to be sort of like riding a bicycle where we're out of the project and into the project and very carefully remaining perpendicular to our purpose.
Yeah. I asked the question here when we started this part was in terms of are there political influences or cultural, and I should have mentioned to you, and I started off this way, that much of my project time was on fixed price, but a lot of it was for government entities. And the legislation often changed mid-project.
Oh, isn't that fun?
And so what would happen is we would get from on high a new piece of legislation that might affect something we've already completed, in which case we'd have to go through the whole negotiation process of undoing, redoing, adding to the timelines, perhaps bringing on more staff, those sorts of things. So legislatively, politically, we were often at risk. And the most tense and probably the most quickening types of situations that we dealt with was when there was a change of administration. And so perhaps the administration that we had been working under was very much motivated to get this project out the door. And somewhere in the middle of that project, the new administration came on, and they had little to do with that sort of idea of the project they were doing. We had to make sure that we were far enough along that the new administration would look at it and say, you know what, we can't throw away the money that's already been spent. So they would go
Right.
along with completing the project. So there were many times that legislation and politics, real life politics, government politics, affected exactly what we did and provided impetus for those let's just do it moments.
And we see this inside of corporations, right? CEOs
Yes.
come and go, vice
Yes.
presidents come and go, organizations get reorged. And this is natural. This is like, fall, winter, spring, and summer, and change is that. I'm going to ask you something that may be a little bit off the cuff. How do you prepare for that? Or can you even prepare for that?
Yeah, I don't think you can prepare ahead of time necessarily, because you're not quite sure what's coming down the pike, if anything. But I think in terms of good client relationships, good solid fundamentals in terms of your delivery process, good solid trust factors with both your team and your client. And when something like that hits, there is room to negotiate and work out a win-win situation, or a what's good for me is good for you. And I think as long as you have some tricks, I don't even like to say tricks, some techniques in your back pocket. For example, I was in a situation where we had one of these legislative processes come down, and we suddenly had to implement early because of a particular piece of legislation. We had very good relationships with our client. It wasn't even our client's call. It was people above our client's pay grade that required this major change to the project we were working on. So what we did was we sat down, and this was in our bag of techniques that we carry to every project. We sat down and looked at the entire functionality that was being affected by the legislative change and by this quick change to our schedule. And we said, okay, this is necessary. This part we can live without. This part has to be in. This part can wait 6 months. And so we ended up not de-scoping, but sort of taking parts of the scope and moving them further along in the timeline, compressing what we had to get done in the time given, and then delivered according to that schedule. And so as long as we had that good faith process with our clients, we could pretty much weather almost any storm that came our way. So it wasn't so much a matter of preparing for it as having good, solid fundamentals in our back pocket that we could rely upon in those situations.
Basically, being on a ship and realizing that you can trust your shipmates, and realizing that there's a couple other ships that are going through the same process, and
Yes.
the bad weather is coming in, and
Yeah.
you just understand how to run your ships, and both ships know how to work on their own as well as work with the ships together.
Yeah.
That's what I found. We had a similar situation. One of the products that we needed for our upgrades on cell towers was not UL certified yet, universal or universal laboratory certified, which means it couldn't be used in production, right?
Yeah.
And there were 6 weeks where we were all on tenterhooks as to whether we could even start the work. And the federal government had already created the windows where we were going to be able to do work on our first cell towers, 4-hour windows. So we were we were not sleeping, but at the same point, we knew how we were going to work. We knew how our cell tower owners were going to work, and also the cell providers, to be able to work within all of these things going on. This is complex.
Yeah.
And it's not just with projects like you ran or what I ran. This is regular human behavior too. This is what happens inside companies.
It is. And I think if I want to impress upon our listeners anything as project managers, as new project managers coming along and seeing these sorts of things, this will happen. These sorts of issues will happen. Someone is going to come down and say, just get it done. And as a result of that, we have to be quick-witted, quick-minded, quick in understanding as to how to navigate these territories.
Now,
On my one of my most recent projects, we were coming up against the deadline, and there were some developmental issues whereby things were getting to us late, and they were also getting to us in incorrect status. But we had a deadline looming, not so much that you can't move a deadline, because you can negotiate that. But what had happened with this deadline is we had lined up training rooms, we had lined up other vendors who had to be on site, ready to help implement. We had all of these dominoes in place that had we crashed this schedule and moved it out, we would have knocked over all of these dominoes. So I worked with my team leads, and we looked at the functionality that was there, and we said, wait a minute, we can't get these major pieces right here tested. But if you look at how our system works, those don't even come into play for 6 months. We can implement with those being imperfect and untested and not put any risk on the schedule. And we implemented on time. But we had to look at that. We had to sort of go deep within our ability to think through these processes, meet the client's requirements, and still avoid a lot of the risk. So I think for any new budding project managers, just keep your options open and just be aware of what is available to you.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to switch gears here, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
Is there a happy side or a good side of just get it done?
Yeah, I think there is. I talked earlier about the profit motive. Obviously, the profit motive, if you can get it done in a very structured approach without losing a lot of schedule, profits are good. We need profits to keep industry moving. So that's a good motive. I think the other part of it, and this was true in my situation, it kicked me out of my need for perfection. And it helped me personally understand that, and I don't want to say good enough is good enough, because sometimes good enough it's all subjective, but sometimes if we meet the quality and expectations of our client, even though it's not our own perfectionism quality, and I talked about this at length earlier, I think that's also good, is to kind of get me out of that, or get us out of that particular thought process. And then I want to also talk a lot about mindset in terms of how that helps, but I want to hear your thoughts on this as well.
I don't want to steal your thunder. Mindset is the way I'm thinking about it. I had to change my perceptions, but once I changed my perceptions about just get it done, it's all of a sudden, like you said, it opens up options. It allows me to set aside what I think is good, and it allows me to bring in people who are smarter than me to help me solve the problem. This is where I learned how to set aside my ego, where I said, I'm not the smart person here. I don't know what the client is thinking. They're doing something over there. So the client has something to contribute. I don't know all about this technology yet. So my team has something to say, and my organization has something to say, because they're not pushing back. And so I need to actually, look to my experts. And even though the decision may not be here today, I can set an expectation for saying, let me get this information. I will give you the best answer here within 24 hours. And I always delivered on that. And that's where I said, wow, this is powerful. I'm actually doing better work and more work than I ever did before. And I'm meeting within the needs of people. But there was always that risk. And I had a couple managers who were less than mature who actually took advantage and said, Tim handles the risky things. And it got me pushing further and further outside of my capabilities. And there has to be a time. I've learned there has to be a time when you have like a line in the sand that you will not cross.
I think what I heard you say, and I thought this was very well done in terms of, is there something good to come out of this just do it mindset? And what I heard you say was it forced you to learn to ask for help.
Uh-huh.
It forced you to learn to trust your team, maybe even empower your team.
Mm-hmm.
It forced you to rely on your customers. And by the way, I just despise IT companies who think that their customers, their client staff is less than, because I have worked with some of the smartest client staff known to our nation.
Oh, if you know, take a janitor to lunch.
Yeah, exactly.
Take a client to lunch and don't tell them things. Ask them things.
Ask them, yeah.
And they will spill all of their knowledge and wisdom because nobody else is talking with them.
So in terms of you trusting your team, asking for help, and trusting your client, what you just told me was you learned that if you were going to just do it, it wasn't going to be Tim just doing it. It was going to be Tim and his army making sure that it gets done. And that's the way I think that's the huge benefit of bringing this sort of mindset. I was going to say mentality, but it's not a mentality, it's a mindset.
Right,
that
right,
there
right.
are times that we have to just get it done.
You know, in future discussion, I'd like to start talking sometime, not in the next few sessions, but at some time in the future, I'd like to start introducing the concepts of Agile, because what you're discussing here are actually the precepts of what we call Agile today. You say you grew up in the whole, predictive model of the schedule, scope, and budget. And risk and quality structure, and you have that all powerful plan. But what you're talking about is when the plan doesn't work, you're able to go into unknown space and you're able to deliver in an unknown space.
Well, exactly. And think of that example I provided just a few minutes ago in terms of saying, well, we're not going to need this functionality for 6 months, so there's no risk to implement with it not tested. In many ways, what I'm hearing you say is that is an Agile concept where you can say, this piece we can get in, this piece we will work with later and make sure it's in.
Right, right. And we'll talk more about that later. It's
Super.
Brilliant. Yeah, I'm totally confounded at the fact that, what we're talking about is natural and is human if you do this work enough. And it's common sense. And yet we compartmentalize it as a formal structure that seems mysterious and magic.
Well, I'm laughing because what you said, it's natural and it's common sense, but it's not. I think you also added a phrase in there, if we've done it before kind of thing, because it's frustrating to me when I'm on a situation and I can help the project manager or the leads get through a process like we've been discussing with the just do it mindset. And yet they're so tied to the way they've always done things that they're not open to understanding that there are ways to get through this if we just apply a little bit of common sense and a little bit of thinking, a little bit of analysis. That's what we are first, and analysts before project managers.
I tell you, I think we should change our names sometimes, because I'm just like you. We should be project analysts, lead, project analyst leaders or something like that,
Yeah.
because I have seen the value of stepping back, taking a breath, and thinking something through. I think that was the result of getting enough gray hairs to where I decided there was a better way to do this.
Yeah. I'd mentioned before that part of my learning and part of the good part that I understood about this mindset once I got over my own perfectionism, it taught me, and this goes back to analytical qualities again, but it taught me to always look for a way forward. And you know what I found? I found even doing my lawn, working on my backyard, and I hit a particular situation where I'm stymied, I look for a way forward. I look for a challenge, a way to get around where I'm stymied. And it doesn't matter. It's almost like that thinking process has now become part of my life process. If I have a financial situation, I go, oh, I can do this, this, and this. I don't have to do it that way all the time. So there's ways to say, just do it means always look for a way to move forward, no matter how much you're challenged and how much your schedule is challenged.
There are 17 or 19 different forms of analysis that you can actually do as per the PMBOK. And it's fascinating to go through them. And they all provide a different result. Alternatives analysis, variance analysis, trend analysis, root cause analysis. And using these tools and putting these tools in place before your emotions make the decision is one of the most powerful mindsets that you can apply. It changes the whole perspective you have about projects and the role of the project manager in the work. I see this a lot in the students I have who've been doing projects for 3 to 5 years versus the ones who have been doing for 10 to 20 years.
So let me offer you a 20th, an analytical process that a lot of project managers get in. It's called paralysis analysis.
Yes.
Or analysis of, and it just gets in the way.
Right. And again, how do we know when we're applying enough analysis and not too much? It's that magical word optimal, right? Every
Yes.
project has its definition of success. And when the analysis gets more important than the work, this is wonderful. There's two magical words that I found that made all of these decisions real easy. One is optimal, where the benefits equal the cost. The other is necessary. And if I wrote, on one hand here, on the other hand, I would write, is this necessary? And for my students, I define necessary as, number one, does it increase project success? Number two, does it minimize project failure? And those are the criteria one should use in approving changes, in prioritizing issues and decisions, and in all of your work. Is this necessary?
Well, and I think the other part of that is even the word optimal. You and I can probably, let's say you and I were managing the same project in parallel universes. I think we could probably agree on what's necessary most of the time, based on the fact that we are many, many years of experience under our belt. But I think your definition of optimal and my definition of optimal would not always agree in every situation. But that doesn't mean that your optimal or my optimal are wrong. I think that you can work, once you make that decision as to what's optimal and strive to make it work, then it all.
So that was Peter Drucker, and that was the magic that Peter Drucker offered the world. He said, as an entry-level manager, you look at making decisions that are right. If you make a decision that's wrong, you fail. but he said a leader knows that a third of the decisions you're going to make are going to be bad, and a third of the decision you make are inconsequential.
Yeah.
So what Drucker said was, don't think of it that way. Change your mindset where a decision is more of a course correction instead of making historical behavior right or wrong.
i.e. rewriting history? Is that what you're saying? But that's exactly correct. And in fact, one boss told me one time, he said, don't worry about making the perfect decision. If you get 60% of your decisions on the right path, even if they're not 100% correct in themselves, at least you're moving forward, because not to make a decision is to make a decision.
Right.
And then you're going to sit there and you're going to flounder. So if you're 60%, if you're right 60% of the time, you're already ahead of most of the people that you're competing with.
And you have more information, which means you have a better opportunity for better analysis, which means the next decision you're going to make is even better, is even better, and is even better. So Jim Collins, in his greatness books for leadership in businesses, right? He said that the best way to approach these things is what he calls bullets to cannonballs. He said, what you need to do, and he was speaking to executives, but project managers can use this too, is shoot a bullet for your trajectory. Find out which way the wind's going. Find out how far and the angle of inclination based on gravity and force and all these things, right? Waste a few little bullets. And then when you've gathered that information, you know exactly how to shoot your cannonball.
That's an interesting thought. I'll have to try that sometime. No, not really, but to me, a cannonball is much heavier than a bullet and would, anyway, that's getting into the technicalities of what it is that we're talking about. But again, go ahead, Tim.
I have one other question. Finish, and then I have another question for you.
Well, I was going to just continue on with this a little bit with this mindset idea. The other part that I have found, what it did to me, the whole idea of getting into the just do it mindset, was it gave me a much more optimistic approach to every project I worked on. No matter how difficult the project, I was optimistic. Sometimes I didn't feel optimistic, but I forced myself to be optimistic, and my team saw me as optimistic. And together, we were able to lift all of our boats at the same time and move forward. Did we make every scheduled deliverable exactly on time? No. But had we gone in with a woe is me hangdog expression, we would not have made half of those on time. And so I think optimism is another learning process that I achieved as a result of just do it.
Right, right. The house is on fire. You cannot get through the front door. You cannot get through the back door. What about the kitchen window?
Yes.
That's the thing. That's the thing. You never stop giving up. This is persistence. This is resoluteness. We don't use those words enough, especially in business. These are human superpowers. They're not just characteristics.
Well, and I think we need to come back to the EQ. We did a podcast on emotional intelligence. We may need to come back to that and add to it with exactly what you just talked about: resilience and perseverance and those sorts of qualities that are part of our emotional quotient.
Yes, yes. There's one last topic I do want to touch on.
Yeah, you were going to ask me a question. Go ahead.
One of the other things that I think we need to consider when we're talking about just get it done is our understanding of the business environment. One of the ways that Project Management Institute has restructured the whole understanding of project management was they've actually broken it down into 3 domains: the leadership domain, the process domain, which is the knowledge areas and process groups, and then the business domain. And by doing that in 2015, they said, you know what? We as project managers need to understand the business. The business itself is a stakeholder. We have to understand the context within which our projects operate, and we need to understand the hows and whys that business operate. Now, me, couple degrees in business, I got this, but this is a topic that we generally just overlook. Now, you spoke to this today eloquently about this. Do you have any comments on this?
Well, I think, and getting back to what I learned again from the Just Do It process, what was good about it was the other part that I learned was I stopped thinking in terms of schedule and thought much more in terms of product. And when you think in terms of product or your end result, you are thinking in terms of the business. And so if I'm able to satisfy my client, and even if I don't meet every single expectation they have, but I'm satisfying them as I go along and show them that what I have produced works well for them and what is still to be produced is coming later and that I will make good on that. As long as I can maintain that process and understand my business relationship, business or product over process and schedule, I think that's a huge part of what we need to do as project managers.
Yes, and we have an issue that is expressed in this statement. The deliverable was a success. The project was a failure.
Yeah, I told you that story about one of my colleagues from National Speakers Association who did that a project in an Eastern country, and the CEO, when she asked the CEO of a particular vendor's performance, they said they delivered on time, they delivered on schedule, they gave us what we asked for, they delivered within budget, and we'll never work with them again.
Right, because it's not just delivering a deliverable. It's delivering something that meets an objective. It's delivering value itself. And that's something that we have to remember. And when we remember that there's something out there called a business, it's the business that grants us the time and money. It's the business that grants us the resources to do these things. And it's the business that supports us to do this grand work that we all love and live to work around.
Well, yeah, and if I can take this even one step further, most of my clients through my career were government entities. And a lot of the pushback that we got in terms of the Just Do It was from an uninformed legislature. And I will say uninformed, and I'll also say inexperienced. Some of the things they asked of the projects were beyond ridiculous, which is what caused us to have to kind of dig deep and still maintain our ability to deliver. And here's what I came to the conclusion. Some of those people who were pushing this they weren't even particularly highly intelligent people. They just had a constituency that they were trying to appease or to please or to benefit. And so as a result of that, we had to respect what they were doing for their constituency and make it happen anyway, regardless of our personal feelings or our personal thoughts.
Right, right. Stepping out of what we know as quote unquote the norm, or it's always been done that way.
Yeah,
that's a hard thing to do. And the problem is that's what projects are all about. They're unique. They've never been done before, and they have to be done in a certain amount of time. So if we remind ourselves, just like in our first project, that those two things are going to have to be balanced, I think we're better off. And just get it done is not this frightening monster, but it's something that we can actually build in, not necessarily as an expectation, but as a tool we can use to refine and do better than what we thought we could do going in.
Yeah. One of my favorite, I'm going to kind of finish with this story. One of my favorite stories that really lends itself to this is we were working on a project for a government department. It was a very, very large project, several $100 million. And we implemented largely on time, pretty much within the schedule that they had given us, certainly within the budget. And we were sort of, patting ourselves on the back that this was complete. In the meantime, the CIO for the agency came to us. What he had been doing, unbeknownst to us, is he had been watching the governmental statistics coming out of another department that had nothing to do with who we were working for. And he realized this was during the economic downturn, I think of 2008, around that time. He realized that what was happening was the other department's constituents would suddenly run out of benefits from there and have to be applying to the new system that we had just implemented. Well, our new system could handle it from a processing perspective, but it was not prepared for handling it from a personnel perspective. That is, the deluge of applications that we would get for our new system could not be handled by the clerical staff that was handling the situation. And so he asked us to do the impossible, to put up a client-facing portal where the clients could, from the comfort of their own homes or libraries, apply for, present their applications to our department without having to come into the office and deluge the office with applications. In 4 months, we had the rudimentary pieces of that up, running, and functional. And when that mass of humanity hit because of the economic downturn, we were ready. Now, why do I tell that story? Because it is exactly the kind of situation we often find ourselves in when somebody had the foreknowledge, because he was watching what was going on around him, and said, we need to just do this. No questions, nothing pretty, just do it. Our people depend on it. Our clients, our own customers depend on this. And so I still have a huge amount of respect for this gentleman and for what he was willing to do to say, we're not doing this perfectly, but we are going to do it.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
And again, this speaks to your prioritization of people and relationships over process. That actually speaks very clearly to that statement.
Yeah, I've written about that story because it's one of my favorites from my experience. I've written about it in my blog. It's going to be in my book. And it's one of those things that I still maintain. He's retired. This gentleman's retired, and he and I still maintain contact because I so respect him, and we developed a friendship as a result of all of that.
That's incredible. Those are the moments we all live for.
Yes. And we helped. It was in the tens of thousands of people who were able to be helped as a result of his decision and his also striving for something that wasn't perfect, but was good enough to stem the flow of what was about to happen.
Wow.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's a great
Congratulations to him. We were just his servants.
So you've said that you want to actually explore emotional quotient, EQ.
I'd like to, yeah, I thought we did a great podcast on that, but I think we can go deeper.
Okay,
doesn't have to be next week, but we can certainly look at this.
Okay, I think that would be fun. Thanks for that.
So what do you think? We got about a minute or so. Let's wrap this up. What are your kind of final thoughts on this whole idea? I'm hoping that we upset some apple carts out there in terms of people's thinking, in terms of, we have to do it right versus we have to just do it.
There are two sides to everything. Alternatives analysis is the most important thing that we need to look at. When you're looking at a change, you have to analyze not just what does this change do, but you also have to analyze what does this change not do. And when we look at just get it done, we have to look at how does this negatively impact me? And I have to look at what are the opportunities that this puts on my plate. There's always the feasibility of just get it done that you have to overcome. But with the feasibility, there are opportunities. Everything that we do is associated with business risk, which means Every threat is associated with an opportunity. And
I,
you?
li- no, I like that. In fact, you reminded me that we often do a SWOT analysis, but it's really a SWOT analysis. We forget the O, which is the
Yes.
opportunities, because we do take
Yes.
some risks. But I think if there was anything that I want to instill upon people or just have them think through, it's that just do it is an important factor within our project management domain, but not at the expense of someone's whim that says, if I just get this done a month early, that puts another $10,000 in my personal pocket. That is not a just do it mentality or a good process. If that happened to me, I'd be looking for opportunities elsewhere to ply my
Right.
trade. But
Right.
I think the idea is, again, the more we develop our experience, the more we develop our intuitive qualities as project managers, the more our decisions in terms of just do it will be helped along with that mindset.
Very good. Very good. I thank you for this. This has been really an enjoyable conversation.
I can't
Um,
believe the hour went by so fast.
that means it was a good conversation. Where can we find you out in public, Merv?
Well, my website is peoplefirstprojectmanagement.com, and
Mhm.
I've got my offerings and my blog up there, and also on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn. Actually, I'm on Instagram and Twitter and all those places. But I think from a project standpoint, LinkedIn and my website are probably the two best places to find what I'm doing.
Excellent. And I as well. I'm over at LinkedIn as well.
Great.
And you can expect to see me within the next few weeks out on Twitter and Instagram also.
All good stuff.
Very
All
good.
right, Tim, we are a little over time. So until next time, I bid you adieu.
Thanks again, Merv. And thank you, everyone who's watching this. Reach out with any comments or questions, and we may even use that in future shows.
Oh, absolutely. Until next time, Tim.
Thanks again.